Think we can probably go ahead and get started. I know some of y'all were in the waiting room for a little while. Welcome again. This is Emily Motter from Hospitality, Minnesota. We are super excited to have Pat Simmons and Leann Kispert from Explore Minnesota with us today for the second in our Operating Now series. The Operating Now series is a series of webinars that we're doing here at Hospitality, Minnesota about a variety of topics to help all of our members adjust to operating in what I won't call the new normal, but in our current conditions. So coming up after this one, on Tuesday the 14th, we've got Hospitality and COVID-19, Mitigating Health and Legal Risks with Mylan Johnson-Lewis. So that one's going to cover liability and a few other things. I know liability was a hot button issue for several folks. On July 21st, we've got Making Your Web Presence Work for You with Minnesota Web Marketing. In that session, we'll cover what are some steps that businesses can take to make sure that their web presence is reassuring right now, kind of in the context of COVID-19, and making sure that those are easy steps that you can take to make sure that you're communicating things clearly, nothing that's going to require, a special web expert or anything like that. And then on July 28th, we'll have challenging customer conversations with Ridge Training. And then on August 5th, we'll have one more. We're kind of nailing some details down with our presenter, but save the date. And then as far as today's presentation goes, Pat and Leann are going to deliver their information. If you've got any questions kind of as they're going, feel free to type those in the chat, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end, and I will kind of moderate those questions. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Pat. Let me get his PowerPoint up. And we're ready to go. Take it away, Pat.
All right. I unmuted, and hopefully you can hear me okay. Good. I've got quite a bit of material to cover in a relatively short period of time, so I'm going to jump right in. But first of all, thank you, Emily and Hospitality Minnesota, for inviting Leann and me to be part of this series. We're happy to share information that we have that might be helpful to your members. What we're talking about today is traveling and marketing during a pandemic. I'm specifically focusing on consumer sentiments. Explore Minnesota recently surveyed a sample of subscribers to its monthly travel e-newsletter about plans and attitudes regarding travel. While national consumer studies have revealed a significant and evolving set of attitudes about travel, this survey allowed Explore Minnesota to gain a better understanding specifically among a group of Minnesota-oriented travelers. Topics included recent and upcoming leisure travel plans in 2020, assurances needed to instill confidence for travel, current motivators for leisure travel, and impacts of recent civil unrest on perceptions of Minnesota as a travel destination. I'll start with just a teaser about our survey results, and then we'll launch into some more specifics on them. If you can just hold the slides. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Emily. Survey results reflected pent-up demand to get out and travel, tempered by concerns about safety related to travel. And when thinking about their next leisure trip, some of the respondents' highest ratings reflected longings to get back to times when they were more free to travel, as reflected in a quote of, "I always take a summer trip." It's one of our response options, and it got the highest rating. And it was followed by three other sentiments that touched on freedom and nostalgia for more normal times. Most respondents reflected concern around the health risks of travel in their responses, including refusal by some to travel in the foreseeable future, or requiring assurances that their travel surroundings would be sanitized and they would be able to maintain social distance at their destination. By contrast, responses and comments by a smaller number of respondents indicated no need for concern about COVID-19, with some of them expressing defiance about restrictions, and we've all heard about that in the news of late, and those restrictions that limit their choices around travel, choices they think they should have been able to make for themselves all along. Outdoor experiences and visiting friends and family received the highest ratings for providing motivation to take a summer trip from among 13 activities. On the other end of the motivational spectrum, where experience is offering less opportunity for distancing, like sports events, live concerts, nightclubs, and other urban experiences. The recent police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and associated civil unrest impacted how some respondents look at Minnesota as a place to visit. However, the majority of respondents were either not impacted or were not impacted much by those events. That said, respondents' comments offered a glimpse into serious reservations about the recent violence, along with safety concerns stemming from news coverage of a defunded police force. The majority of respondents were Minnesota residents, reflecting the Travel e-newsletter subscriber list that was sampled for the survey. Respondents were disproportionately older, retired, and more likely to live in households without children compared with the general population and travelers overall. It's a good idea to keep these characteristics in mind when looking at survey results. So we'll take a step back to look at where the report for the survey now and dig into some of the specifics. Next slide, please, Emily. Thanks. First of all, where can this information and other information related to coronavirus be found on Explore Minnesota's offerings? On our industry website, we have a COVID-19 hub page, which has a variety of information that's reflective both of a wide variety of travel research related to COVID and also a lot of different offerings that Leann's going to speak more directly to, which is things that are available as resources for folks who are interested in both marketing and communicating to their guests and potential guests about their offerings and trying to be attuned to the particular concerns during COVID as they do so. Next slide, please. One of the pages on our industry website is the place where reports reside, including the reports on this and other COVID-related surveys. If you look under research and then reports as one of the options there, you'll find it's going to stay at the top of that list of options there once you get into the reports for reports about recent surveys. Next slide, please. The methodology, we again went out to a group of folks who are our customers, who we know are going to be tuned into Explore Minnesota's offerings and traveling in Minnesota. We use SurveyMonkey, which is a pretty common off-the-shelf commercially available survey tool, and went out to we picked a big group. We didn't know how big of a response we'd get. We went out to 20,000, got about just under 1,400, just under 7% response rate. Next slide, please. First thing we asked about was, so what's the status of your travel during the COVID era? And we found out that about 2/3 of the respondents had canceled or postponed at least one leisure trip since the onset of coronavirus-related restrictions. That 2/3 is represented by the 3 bars. I guess it's actually 4 bars in the middle of, nope, 3 bars. I canceled one or more, I canceled or postponed one or more trips, and I canceled or postponed one or more leisure trips and have already rescheduled at least one of them. So of that 2/3 of our respondents, about half had not yet rescheduled any of their trips, but planned to reschedule at least one. Just under a quarter, or 15% of all respondents, had already rescheduled at least one trip, and just over a quarter of all respondents had no plans to reschedule any of them. Next slide, please. We asked about the timing of upcoming trips, and given that this survey took place about a month ago, there was we were already a little ways into June, so that might have cut into the number of June planned trips a little bit, but you can see that, not surprisingly, the further we went into the summer, the greater the likelihood of planned trips. Those 3 bars for June, July, and August represent 62.5% of respondents who indicated they have at least tentative plans to take a summer trip. Many in this group had plans for trips in more than 1 month. Then you look at the next 3 months, September, October, and November, and about half of respondents said that they have at least tentative plans for travel during that fall period. As with the summer trips, some of those respondents had plans for trips in more than 1 month. And just over a fifth, or 21% of respondents, had no current travel plans during 2020. That's lower than is found in most national polls, and probably reflects the fact, again, that this is a group of folks who are more inclined to travel than the general public. Next slide, please. This reinforces some concepts we've been hearing for a while, which is the destinations of trips tend to be close to home. This will be reinforced by the next slide as well. But right now, what we're looking at is that most folks are planning on staying within 500 miles from home, and that includes 23% indicate that the destination of the next trip will be beyond 500 miles, but nearly 2/3 said their next destination is closer to home, including almost half, 45.5%, that said that their next trip was going to be local or in-state. And another just over a fifth, or 20.5%, said that it would be regional within 500 miles. So that could be, a lot of that's going to be within Minnesota. This is a group of respondents who are not only being oriented to Minnesota travel, is pretty heavily oriented toward, a lot of them are Minnesota residents. So a lot of travel close to home. Next slide, please. So you can see that although it's not called road trips in this slide, road trips are dominant during the pandemic. And for Minnesota, being typically a drive destination, it's not a surprise that this number would come out high, because even in normal times, road trips get most Midwest visitors to their destinations. But in the era of COVID and the safety concerns around flying, road travel overshadowed air travel by a factor of 9-to-1 for the motor travel of respondents' next trip. That's considerably higher than normal. And 82% of the respondents said they will use their own vehicle. Most of the other categories reflect some means of ground transportation. Next slide, please. So we start getting into a little bit more of the meat of the survey here that taps into concepts that might be useful in both marketing messages and to keep in mind with communicating directly with customers and potential customers, and also emphasizing in your meetings with and discussions, conversations with your staff about things to keep in mind that are going to be top of mind for customers, both in this case, it's a lot of it is as they're thinking about travel, but it's also going to be reflective of the things that they'll be thinking about while they're on their trips and at your location. When thinking about their next leisure trip, some of the respondents' highest ratings reflected longings for travel in more normal times. This is what I noted in my intro comments. I always take a summer trip, got the highest ratings by a considerable margin. It was followed by 3 other sentiments that touched on freedom and nostalgia for normal times, which I think the longer we go, the further we get into this pandemic way of life, that freedom, longing for freedom and this nostalgia for more normal times is just going to get stronger. I think it's reflected in some of the activities that we're seeing, particularly among younger folks who are not always adhering to the safety guidelines, and the folks who are bringing down the average age of COVID cases at this point. Even though the current era is fraught with challenges around health, jobs, and finances, respondents gave low ratings to sentiments of feeling too overwhelmed and being overburdened by increased financial strain or uncertainty as they thought about their next trip. So they want to travel. They're looking for ways to and excuses to travel. Next slide, please. The health and safety considerations that instill confidence for travel are provided additional concepts to tap into, and again, in marketing messages and communications with customers. At a time when health and safety are paramount, it follows that measures that allow consumers to feel in control of their own health and safety will instill in them the greatest confidence for travel. Little differentiation can be found among the majority of measures that were rated. Again, most of them are safety related, health related, and it just kind of reinforces the concept that my health, my safety are paramount as I think about travel, and what I need to be able to do to feel confident about traveling is to feel confident that I'm going to be safe and be able to stay healthy. That said, one measure stood out with the highest ratings, although most of them came out pretty similar, knowing that extra efforts will be taken to sanitize the places I will be. Respondents provided high ratings for confidence instilled by vaccines, knowing that their destination would be welcoming of visitors and would make it easy to maintain social distance, and having details from their lodging property about safety protocols they have in place. On the other end of the spectrum, confidence would not be bolstered by assurances of travel safety from friends or family or from the US government. I think this is reflective of an increasing skepticism about messages that are coming from, mixed messages oftentimes, coming from US government sources. But the friends and family is kind of an interesting one, because friends and family are usually one of the highest rated ways that people find out about travel. And so the fact that that's not the way that people are counting on being safe is from recommendations from friends and family I found that to be quite interesting. Next slide, please. Motivators for summer overnight leisure trips, again, highlight some of the things that are reflective of messages that we've heard in different ways already, both in these survey results and in the media. Outdoor experiences are important in normal times, but the opportunities they offer for social distancing have elevated their desirability during COVID times. Visiting friends and relatives is also, as it typically is, a quite high motivator. As with outdoor experiencing, visiting friends and family is typically a strong motivator, and one that is likely enhanced by current safety measures that keep people isolated in the name of public health. Interestingly, both new and familiar experiences rated high and in a pretty similar range. This indicates perhaps a desire for both the safety offered by familiarity as well as a longing to try something new, following long stays at home and social isolation that have afforded little excitement for many folks. On the other end of the motivational spectrum were experiences offering less opportunity for distancing, like sports, events, live concerts, and nightclubs, and other urban experiences. Next slide, please. More than a third of survey respondents stated that recent events have no impact on their perception of Minnesota as a travel destination. So these are recent events that have been in the news related to the George Floyd killing and protests and civil unrest that have stemmed from that. But still, safety considerations will be more important as they choose where to go and what to do in Minnesota. This is just one more safety consideration now to consider, but it's become a bigger and bigger part of the mindset of consumers as they're thinking about where to travel. Relatively small portions of respondents are either less likely to consider Minnesota for a leisure trip or will never again consider taking a leisure trip in Minnesota. But it's not a non-factor. It's still, the fact that anybody says they're not coming here again because of what's been happening recently is a significant thing. 12% of respondents are taking a wait-and-see approach, waiting to base their response on how the police case and the protests play out. This was, again, a month ago, so it was shortly after the worst of the civil unrest and when all of this was in the news. It still remains to be seen how this is all going to play out, both in the media and in our everyday world that we're living in, and then in the minds of travelers. If we could just stay on this slide for a moment, I'm going to capture a few things about an open-ended question that we had, where we asked, in a few words, how do you anticipate your future leisure travel will be similar to or different from your previous travel? Responses to this question provide insights about things to focus on when communicating with customers again, and reinforce the importance to all of your customer-facing staff. I'll say that one of the biggest things that came through to me on this was that many respondents expressed the need for control over their environment, with an emphasis on being able to do whatever they need in order to protect themselves from the possibility of being exposed to the virus. Folks in general seem to be increasingly confident that they can take the safety precautions that they need for themselves, but it's getting out in public, getting into situations where they don't have the complete control over what their surroundings are, seems to be highly anxiety producing for a lot of folks. In the same vein, many responses reflected concern about others not sharing their level of interest in observing safety protocols, which in turn would shape their choice of destinations and activities to ones that would minimize the number of people and unforeseen circumstances they would encounter. So again, back to those places where folks are not going to be encountering as many people. Outdoor spaces, outdoor activities tend to be the things to get a disproportionate amount of attention and interest from people. So if you have those opportunities either available to you or nearby to you, those are certainly things to focus on. A number of responses reflected sentiments that COVID concerns and travel restrictions are overblown and are unnecessary. Some of these responses included defiant statements related to not wearing masks and or not altering travel plans at all. Here's one of the comments. I feel it is stupid for us to have to wear face masks while flying. So there are plenty of folks who really think that this is something that they should be able to take their own measures to address. And a common theme among responses was a yearning for travel to return to what it has been in the past. People are clearly missing travel experiences they had become accustomed to. Next slide, please. I'll just briefly flip through a couple of things about survey respondents. Again, because this is folks who are subscribers to our e-newsletter, they're very heavily geographically oriented toward Minnesota. A few of them spread out, but nearly 3/4 were Minnesota residents, and a very small portion of them were residents of other countries. Next slide, please. This demonstrates that, as I mentioned earlier, that it's a group of folks who are disproportionately older, fewer kids in household, and retired. There was almost a similar number that were retired to the number that were employed full-time, which is a pretty good indication that it's an older group of folks. Next slide, please. Before closing, I wanted to share up front, I provided an indication of the resources that are available on Explore Minnesota's industry website. I tend to focus very heavily on U.S. Travel's website. They offer a great perspective of both impacts in terms of economic impacts, and also provide a great hub for a lot of consumer-oriented studies. Many travel research companies have stepped into this space in a big way, and many of them are offering their services and sharing the information that they receive very broadly. It's been quite interesting, and I'm really appreciative of that sentiment to share information in the seemingly with the spirit that we're all going to get through this better if we have better information. And so setting aside some of the motives of that businesses are typically going to be operating under. So we have a COVID-19 hub page on our website. US Travel has one on their website as well. So between this and the next slide, if you would advance, please, Emily. Here's a few indications of the kinds of things that are linked to from the US Travel website. They have a forecast that's fairly recent. Link at the top, and down toward the bottom is how bad are things? Well, here's where they're calling it the Great Travel Depression, and there's a fact sheet that addresses issues with that. So next slide, please. And one of the things that I pay attention to is on that US Travel website is a link to data that's updated on a weekly basis. This is for Minnesota, losses in travel spending. And so through the end of June, we're approaching $4 billion of lost travel expenses compared to last year. So next slide, please. This is two of the vendors that I pay particular attention to are Destination Analysts and Longwoods International. These are two of the vendors whose weekly updates of surveys are available on US Travel's website. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leann, who is the Assistant Director at Explore Minnesota Tourism, Senior Manager of Brand Strategy, and she's got some fun stuff to share with you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. We are going to take you through our campaign development and kind of our journey that we have taken over the past 4 months now, I guess we're at. Next slide, Emily, please. So we're going to talk just quickly about what our original marketing plan was for spring and summer. What happened when we hit mid-March and COVID hit. Then again, what happened the end of May and early June with the event of George Floyd's death. Some of the complementary communications and PR that we have accompanying the marketing, and then some resources for you to use. Next slide. So first of all, the original plan for spring and summer 20 was Find Your True North. Next slide. So if you're not familiar, we launched the Find Your True North campaign last spring. And the campaign is really not about direction. It's about self-actualization and about assessing what your passions are and traveling with a purpose. So this is the overall concept behind the campaign. Next slide, please. And this is how it's come to life. So we have the logo up in the upper left-hand corner. And this is a shot from one of our television spots from last summer. Next slide. So the overall strategy, our goal is always to increase travel to and within the state. And how Find Your True North accomplishes that is it's building on the success of our previous campaign, which was only in Minnesota. So now we're keeping only in MN, but it's a punctuation point to True North. And it's also being used as a call to action. So you'll see how that comes to life in some of the creative that follows this slide. But we also do quite a dance in displaying a signature or a balance of both signature and iconic tourism offerings, destinations that are both well-known but also not well-known. attractions, both new and familiar, as well as the hidden gems. So when it comes to our audiences, we have two main opportunity audiences that we really use to target against. The cultural explorers, they tend to be a little bit older. Median age is generally in the upper 40s. They usually travel as couples or as friends, and they generally like the more urban experiences. Spontaneous adventurers, median age is probably mid to upper 30s. They generally travel as families with children, and then also tend to enjoy the outdoor recreational activities a little bit more so. However, both audiences are looking for unique and diverse experiences, and I think that some of the slides that Pat alluded to kind of play that out. And then tying into the true essence of Find Your True North, they want to live life to the fullest. They want to learn things on their vacations, as well as they are highly educated, they're health oriented. And when it comes to media targeting, we look at adults 25 plus, families with children, 2 children under age 18, and some nice household income, averaging out at $106,000. Next slide. So these are just some examples of how the Find Your True North campaign was supposed to be executed this summer. And here you can see how the OLEM in MN fits in with Find Your True North. So nurture your true north only in Minnesota. And then wherever the creative executions allow us, we do put a footer in that identifies the locations. So, so that is also included. Next slide. Here's just another example. This is an Instagram video story. Here you can see the route lines, and here the pin drops do not indicate the destinations. Next slide. But in print, we always do include the destinations at the bottom in the footer. And print also allows us to get a little bit more, gives us a little bit more freedom with headlines. And the headlines always try to encapsulate that emotional stance that will really tie into that those passion points. Next slide. So where do our visitors come from? So we did some research last year with a vendor called, help me, Pat, Strategic Marketing.
Unmute here for a moment. Strategic Marketing and Research Insights.
Thank you. And so they helped us identify where our visitors are coming from. And I have to say, it's not a big surprise. We know Minnesota is a dominant drive market for the Midwest, and that plays out here. The red indicates the hot spots for us throughout the country. However, we also can see that there are some hot spots on the coasts down by LA and San Diego, over by Philadelphia. For some reason, Pennsylvania always pops for us as a market. Some hot spots in Ohio, etc. And the campaign always does have some tactics that reach nationally, but overall, our core markets are, next slide. They're the 5-state area, with some emerging markets identified in orange. So that's Denver, Colorado, Kansas City, Chicago, Omaha. And Winnipeg's not really emerging, but it's more an opportunistic market. And this year we were going to add in Lincoln, Nebraska, and that entire DMA, and also Indianapolis, Indiana. Next slide. But then in March, COVID hit, and we went into lockdown mode, but we also went into our recovery planning phase. Next slide. So I think this word cloud both kind of says it all, and at the same time doesn't say nearly enough. It was such a crazy time, and still is to a degree, but just not really knowing what end was up, not knowing what changes were going to happen from day to day. It was a crazy time. Next click, Emily, please. So first of all, we stopped everything. We had a little bit of marketing in mid-March, mostly search engine marketing, some paid social, but we were getting ready to launch the entire campaign within 1 to 2 weeks of the stay-at-home order being put in place. But we stopped and we completely went dark for a few weeks. Next click. We went into assessment mode, trying to analyze what the current situation was, the state of the virus, looking at the state orders from Minnesota, but also the surrounding states of our core markets and our target markets, and also the national, assessing on the national level, trying to get a finger on the pulse of consumer sentiment, but more importantly, the statuses of businesses. Next click. Research. So Pat was doing weekly surveys with our industry. Our teams were taking pretty much any applicable webinar that we could sit in on. We were also sitting in on calls with other states and also other trade associations, the U.S. Travel Association, etc., just to kind of get ourselves grounded in how people were handling it, how we should be handling it. This was a crisis of unprecedented scope, and just trying to find our path through this was very important. Next click. So planning was just trying to look ahead and anticipating what a recovery campaign could or should look like, and strategizing around that based on what we knew our strengths were and what we hoped the opportunities would be. So we tried to prioritize that, excuse me, by asking, like, where could we really make a difference, and what could we really accomplish, knowing that all of our staff was going into telecommuting mode, and what could we really produce. So this was a big area of conversation for us. Next click. And adapt. So this was and is still hard, but the ability to be fluid and accept that change is going to happen, and in some cases it was happening daily or weekly. It was hard. It was hard to be patient. Sometimes it was feelings of being ineffective. We were making decisions one day and changing them either the next day or the next week, and people were having, you know, this sense of, like, what's the point of making these plans because they're not being, we can't implement them. So it was just really important to be supportive and boost each other up and just know that we're all in it together. Next slide. So our recovery strategy, we clearly did not know how long it would be before anyone could travel. And so we knew we had to plan and just be cognizant of the fact that this campaign had to be optimistic, it had to be hopeful, it had to only be about consideration, it had to be a very soft sell. So you'll see that the key ideas are, you know, we're in this together, and when you're ready to travel, we'll be ready to host you. So that just meant that we had to be very much in alignment with the governor's office and when businesses were going to reopen, because if people are ready to travel, but the tourism industry businesses aren't open or aren't ready to receive them, that would be a problem. Mass awareness. There's not much here for targeting other than 25 plus for an age group and a 500-mile radius of Minnesota, which we just saw as an easy road trip. Next slide. So both our advertising agency and our PR agency worked together to create this message map, which essentially creates themes based on the emotional needs that we were anticipating in each phase of this recovery. And you can see at the bottom what the themes are, that will overcome, finding comfort, rediscovery, and reconnection. The timing of these phases are totally fluid, and it's changed numerous times already. But we're all cognizant that you know, the phases may not align where they currently are on the map. And there is also a PR line there with phases built in, so that we are cognizant of complementary content that aligns with the marketing. Next slide. Media plans, as I said, are no more than 500 miles of Minnesota, surrounding states, plus Omaha. And as it relates to our digital campaign, we're also adding in Chicago. Winnipeg is currently not in the plan because the Canadian border is still closed, and we just monitor that. But with the goal being awareness, the media channels that we're looking at are all about mass audiences. So broadcast television, OTT and CTV, so these are your subscriber television, your Netflix, Hulu's, Amazon Fire, etc. Print, we did have some print that ran because we had some early spring insertions that were all ready to go once the stay-at-home order was given. There's a complimentary digital campaign, and the goal of that campaign is all about video views. And then there is paid social media. Next slide. So our recovery campaign concept was true nature. And so the concept of true nature showcases both the character and the spirit of Minnesotans as they are managing through this new COVID reality, but also the true nature of our natural outdoor assets that Minnesota clearly has in abundance. Next slide. So this was the storyboard of the TV spot that went along with the True Nature campaign. And I'm just going to talk you through the first row because it's a little hard to see. But it started out with essentially a blank screen, and it populated with social posts from real Minnesotans that all were about hope and positivity, and you know, we're going to hang in there, we're going to get through this. And the voiceover during these times, you've shown the world your true nature. We can't wait to show you ours. And then we had a variety of closing tags that we could choose from. Next slide. And this is how it was going to come together in the digital space. Times like these bring out our true nature. See you soon. Next slide. And these are just more examples of different creative layouts. One more, Emily. And next slide. And then we had this. The killing of George Floyd put us into another tailspin, and we had to look at revising all of the current recovery plans. Next slide. So here again, we have a word cloud that kind of says it all. So many different feelings and emotions that really just, you know, popped at that time. And a click, Emily. So again, we had to stop. But what was different at this point is this is the beginning of June, and many sectors of businesses were starting to reopen. And we were hoping to launch our campaign the week of June 9th. So timing was crazy crucial at this point in time. Next slide. Again, we went into assessment mode of the situation, the state and local orders, curfews. We were listening to what was being said by protesters, by officials, by media, by consumers beyond the metro, beyond Minnesota. And also just looking at the status of businesses again. Next click. Research and review. So here review was very important. Suddenly true nature took on a second and unintended negative connotation. We couldn't really go out and say we've shown you our true nature in light of this incident. It was absolutely opening ourselves up for trouble. And we needed to address the voiceover in the opening of the TV spot that was planned. So we had to educate ourselves and challenge ourselves, just really to, listen to what was being said. Again, strategize, and you can click again, Emily. Strategize to be inspirational in spite of all that was happening, and knowing that conveying hope was more important now than ever. Also, our representation of the metro area at this point in time and our creative had to be very thoughtful. On one hand, the timing was urgent because we had tourism businesses throughout the state reopening, and they clearly needed the marketing support. And on the other hand, we had this outpouring of emotions from the masses, both locally and throughout the country. And another click, Emily. And fluidity was the key. So our ad agency actually reworked our television spot in one day. We removed the voiceover and swapped it out for a music track by a Minnesota musician. The lyrics have evoked the right tone and emotion. And we replaced the social footage at the front of the original spot with additional outdoor recreation. All the footage, by the way, was from previous shoots that we did last year. And so all the production was essentially an editing exercise. Next slide. So our current campaign is titled See You Soon. And the sentiment is that the traveler really gets to choose and have control here. We know that the timelines associated with COVID are very personal. And after George Floyd's death, safety has an entirely new meaning. But the revised recovery message is flexible and can be meaningful for consumers no matter what phase of travel planning they're in. Next slide. And a click.
I'm going to share my sound really quick. Hold on.
Oh, thank you.
Let me know if you can hear it.
There's time for adventure, there's people to treasure and moments that no one can hold. There's so much to see when you're wandering free on this little blue world we call home. We call home, the only one we've ever known.
So that's the new television spot. Hopefully you've seen it. It's been in market for a little over about a week and a half now. It is a very soft sell. We don't even say our name. We don't say our website. We don't say start planning your trip today. There's nothing. It's the softest sell ad I think I've ever done. And you can click to the next slide. And so here is how it comes to life in the digital campaign. And now we're still using When the Time is Right, will be right here. See you soon. But we added a different headline, Imagine the Adventures That Await. Start your planning today. And that headline is more for people who just aren't ready yet. And they're still in the dreaming phase and they might not be ready until next year, but they can still kind of imagine, they can dream, they can reminisce. And so that is still important for us. Next slide. And here are just some additional executions of what is out there. And social media, the goals of the paid placement for social media are the video views of the TV spot, promoting the content, and promoting content that's really relevant to what people can do and enjoy right now. And the 4th of July always does really well for us. And consumer engagement was up this year more than ever. It was crazy how well our 4th of July content did. So think of just what you can promote that offers consumers safe and fun relief during this time. Next slide. So quickly, just want to run through the complementary communications plan. Next slide. A reminder here that that along the creative journey, there has always been this complementary PR plan with phases that similarly align with the marketing activities. Pat's research has really helped ground all of these efforts. Next slide. And a click. So communications and PR have been the most flexible tools we have had to pivot our messages really quickly and to help continue the momentum of building consumer confidence. Communicating what is different, but also what is the same has been a goal of ours. Content generation is basically creating the stories for web, for social, for emails, for house ads that are relevant to the current situation. And in some weeks, we're pumping out 3 or 4 articles a week, and then sometimes we can take a break, depending on what the situation is demanding. So some of the articles we did really early on were about exploring Minnesota at a safe distance, virtual tours, virtual events and festivals. We have a page of Minnesota digital puzzles that are all about scenic destinations. And some of the other things we've been doing have been things like we've been editing face masks into some of our photography. So things that really speak to that safety message and how we can, subtly add those into our content. Another click. Media relations has just exploded. Pat's surveys, especially with industry, have provided us with a lot of anecdotal examples for our spokespeople. We've created talking points. And with the tourism industry just being decimated in this crisis, we've had exponential amounts of media requests for interviews on the health of the industry and the impacts of the recovery. And another click. We're planning some PR activations currently, one of which is virtual desk side appointments with select editors and freelance writers, both on a regional and national level. We're also looking at doing some virtual familiarization tours, and we've talked about doing some promotional activations with social influencers. Next slide. We're currently phasing in a new hashtag for all our communications. It'll completely be integrated by August, and it's hashtag ExploreMNAgain. It'll be included in all communications, and it'll also play a role in the theme of our fall Minnesota Explorer newspaper. So everyone is invited to use this hashtag in any of their social copy to showcase the reasons to come visit your area or your business and help increase the overall social conversation and community around it. Next slide. So on our industry website, which is there in the red, we do have a downloadable communications toolkit. And here's a few of the things that are inside, some safety messaging, how to write key talking points for media relations, how to pitch to media, best practices for social media, partnership ideas, and several samples and examples that you can just pull it and customize for yourself. Next slide. we encourage you to share the television video from Explore Minnesota's social channels on your own platforms. We also have on the industry site downloadable headlines of the campaign, graphics of the campaign headlines that you can put over your own photography to customize your own ads. Next slide. And then just some additional agency programmatic opportunities. So we have a co-op marketing program that just launched July 1st. There are numerous media options for you to participate in. This is a pay-to-play. However, I want you to know that the rates are exclusive to Explore Minnesota. They cannot be found in any other place. We also subsidize the programs, so they are very affordable. Any tourism business is eligible. However, there are different requirements, including co-branding. And there is limited availability within each program, but that is spelled out on the website as you're looking at the different opportunities. And then on exploreminnesota.com, if you don't already have a free listing, they are available for eligible tourism businesses. We also have run-of-site advertising available, as well as featured search for your listings. So that just means that you will come up high as a featured listing in any search that a consumer would do. Next slide. And just high level, how we're operating today. We're planning no more than about 3 months at a time, especially as it relates to media placements. We reassess our marketing and communication plans every week. And if it's a crazy week, sometimes more than that. But we look at those plans every single week. We're expecting and hoping a robust summer in 2021. And so because of our production schedules, we do have to plan and produce some of that content yet this summer. So we are in the process of doing that. But we are also cognizant of a potential phase 2 and what that could mean. And, you know, we'll probably have to stop and research and reassess and all of that in the future. And then I also just wanted to throw out that we are getting ready to undergo a diversity audit of our marketing inventory, as well as some focus group research that will hopefully just inform the production that we do moving forward, and that we're moving forward in a respectful and in a way that resonates with the people who see it. Next slide. And with that, I thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you both so much, Pat and Leann. That was a lot of great information. We are really close to time, so I have, I think, just one question right now, unless that spurs a few more. And Pat, you had mentioned kind of going over the research, excuse me, that people seemed more motivated by kind of being more aware of like the safety of the location and the ability to social distance and all of that kind of stuff than they were from like a recommendation from a friend or family member. Were there any like comments that people gave, or was that kind of just a yes or no question? Like, how do you, was there, I guess, what kind of additional thoughts that people have about why a recommendation wasn't good enough for the time being?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Good question. There, that particular finding was out of a question where there were a number of different options that respondents were provided the opportunity to rate on. And this, I think the question was, which of the, you know, how much will each of these instill confidence in you to travel? And so it was based on that, the responses for, and the exact wording of it, but it was, I don't recall, but it was something along the lines of reassurances from family and friends that that a place is safe to stay was rated relatively lower than the other things that were on that list. So there were, I don't recall any comments that spoke to that as much as just how the ratings played out with that on that question.
Thank you. And then Leann, a question I have for you. I don't know if there's an answer for this, but knowing, I guess, how many iterations the See You Soon campaign has been through, is there a way to measure like success? Are there goals? How does that work?
Well, yeah, and because it's an awareness campaign this time around, the measurement is a lot more complicated because you're measuring TV, which is always a little bit more difficult. I think we're just measuring success right now, just in terms more so of communications and engagement that we're seeing with the content that we're putting out, more so than with the marketing. You know, we can easily measure digital and social, etc. But the content that we've been putting out, whenever we put out an email, the traffic to our website spikes. So we're seeing that there is just this thirst for information about what there is to do, what you can do, and it's playing really well. So we know that there's a pent-up demand, and when that demand can be met is kind of an individual decision based on how much risk a person is willing to take. We usually do a return on investment study on our spring and summer campaign. We are not doing that this year just because, first of all, the spend and the campaign have been delayed so many times that the costs don't make sense, but also the campaign is just so different that, and that the environment is so different that the amount of caveats we would have to put with this research would not make it worth it.
That makes sense. Well, we're now a little bit past 11, so thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Pat and Leann, for sharing some of the behind-the-scenes work that EMT does to hopefully, like you said, when we're all ready to get back out there, that we know what's out there for us. So thanks again, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
Bye.